Now more with Frank Gaffney.
Welcome back. We're joined by our boots-on-the-ground guy, Jim Henson, the man who was a former special operator in the United States Army, now is contributing to the public policy fight, well, among other places, by joining us here each week, but also through really speaking for his comrades in arms who are still in uniform. And, Jim, I want in specifically that regard to ask you a question that I've been touching base with a lot of our contributors about since it came to light, and that is the statement made by an unnamed senior State Department official that appeared, I think, in National Journal initially, that the war on terrorism is over. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. Did we win? I mean, did they announce a score? And I guess I'd also be curious. I didn't know the State Department was running that. The last time I checked, the State Department handled sipping mint tea by the pool, telling formal lies and formal wear. And Department of Defense and the military handled the war on terrorism. But who knows? I could have missed the memo. I would say, from the perspective of everybody I know, I don't know that anything's changed. I mean, the global war on terrorism was never the greatest moniker for what we're actually doing. We're fighting the spread of Islamism. We're fighting those who want to spread a new caliphate. And that's pretty much still going just the way it was before this guy opened his mouth to whatever reporter he told it to.
Yeah. So, well, unfortunately.
No, we didn't win.
Yeah, Jim Henson, unfortunately, as we've tried to document in this course that we've been talking about here a bit of late, because we've just rolled it out, MuslimBrotherhoodInAmerica.com is where you can find it, is the extent to which actually things are getting worse in very appreciable ways. And in part, that's because we seemingly are focusing only on one part, maybe even just one subset of one part, namely the al-Qaeda piece of the violent jihad, and missing the other pieces, we think of it as pre-violent stages of jihad. But Jim Henson, just for the purposes of discussion, stay with the al-Qaeda piece of it now. Obviously, you take as much pleasure as I do in us having whacked a number of bad guys. But for the guys on the ground in, say, Afghanistan for the moment, do they think that the tide of war is going in our favor, or do you sense that they're seeing it perhaps running the other way?
Frank, I'll say one thing about the Obama administration. They have had absolutely no qualms in a very active role in stacking dead tangos like cordwood in Afghanistan, Pakistan, occasionally other places. So we've killed a bunch of al-Qaeda. But let's be perfectly clear. We lost that war at this point. Unless something changes, that's not a victory in Afghanistan, and it certainly, from their perspective and from the terrorist perspective, is going to go in their win count. So I don't see how you can say that it's going well. And the bottom line is that was one minor part of the al-Qaeda franchise system, which says that any group of like-minded Islamists that wants to run up the black flag, is now officially members of al-Qaeda as long as they're killing infidels or Muslims in many cases. So I don't know that, we can even claim anything vaguely resembling victory against al-Qaeda, let alone against, as you mentioned, the larger threat, which is all the forms of creeping Islamism that are creeping quite steadily all over the world. So I don't think it's going all that well.
Yeah, and I'm afraid you're right. Obviously, we take no pleasure in that. We want it to be the other way. But the only thing worse than losing in a war like this is deluding yourself that you haven't or that you're not in the process of it. And Jim Henson, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at any of the material that we have at the website, MuslimBrotherhoodInAmerica.com. But we have a section that I'd particularly like to talk with you about it at some future point, but maybe introduce right now, about how the willful blindness on the one hand and the, submission, I guess is the other technical term for it, that the Obama administration and to some extent the previous Bush administration have engaged in with respect to Sharia and, those who are promoting it. The way that's translating into policy, and as specifically it relates to the strategy of the United States government at the moment in a place like Afghanistan. Talk to us a little bit about the rules of engagement, the COIN, so-called counterinsurgency strategy. Does it look to you as though, at least the way we've been practicing it under the Obama administration most especially, is evincing a kind of submissiveness to the foe?
I think there's two pieces to that. First of all, at a tactical level, and if you want to conduct population-centric counterinsurgency, you have to take into account the local populace and their ways, cultures, mores, everything that makes up their society. So you are going to do some things that are counterintuitive, that are counter to normal Western ways, and you're going to do that in order to build rapport, gain their trust, and get them on our side. All right, that's necessary, and that's happened to a small extent, I guess, in the larger context. And then you've got the larger context of whether or not our policies, as they relate to the Afghan government, to the Pakistanis, and our efforts to oppose the greater movement to, Islamize those countries, is effective. And I think the second piece has been woefully ineffective, and like you said, has been a caving to our supposed allies, the Karzai government, et cetera, in order to keep them on board for our efforts there. So I think that's been a dismal failure, although the tactical level, those things had to be done and have been done.
Yeah. In a way, the submission that we've engaged in to try to keep the Karzais and his ilk on board is in some ways less troubling to me than the submissive behavior we've been engaging in to our enemies. But both are problematic, especially because, Jim Henson, as we've been talking about for weeks, under these kinds of conditions, you typically find people who are in that first category, the so-called allies, turning into people of the second category, who are absolutely not, when they sense, we're being weak and irresolute and submissive.
They follow the strong horse. Yeah, they follow the strong horse. We've said we're leaving Afghanistan. We're leaving with our tail between our legs, more or less. And again, that's going to look just to them like they ran us out of there, which they did.
Yeah. Jim, let me turn to a slightly different but very much related piece of this, and that is something we've been visiting about a bit again from time to time. We're going to be talking in the next segment with Congressman Allen West, who's in the throes of trying to make sure that we're providing what we need in the way of equipment and weapons and other support for the troops in the field in Afghanistan at the moment, but perhaps those that will be assigned to future battlefields. And I just wonder what your current assessment is as you're witnessing how this is playing out of the adequacy of the resources that are being provided for our troops. We're specifically looking at this so-called sequestration round of cuts. Now it seems increasingly likely to go down, meaning to be actually, taking maybe as much as $500 billion out of the defense budget. Do you have a current feeling about what that will entail and what it's going to do to the morale and maybe the recruitment and retention of our troops?
Well, crush it. I mean, it's already been crushing it. I mean, aside from the strategic blunders we've made in Afghanistan, if you look at what the people in the military think about the mission, think about the support they're getting, and think about what's likely to be coming down the pike, because things aren't getting any better. We had the peace dividend after the wall fell back in the 90s, and all of a sudden the Soviets were no longer a huge threat. And I think, the Obama administration has declared a faux, dividend now by ending the war on terror, even though we didn't win, by ending the war in Afghanistan and the word being end again. It's not over, but we're declaring an end to it. And the bottom line is the threat hasn't gone anywhere. So we're going to have fewer resources. We're going to give the troops less stuff. We're going to do all these things across the board, cuts and everything. And yet the threat universe has not contracted one iota. So I think it's horribly damaging both to our strategic posture, to deterrence of enemies, and especially to our ability to respond to that as the only expeditionary military in the world.
Yeah. Jim Henson, let me ask you this, too, because this may not be your area of expertise, though I know you're actually working in sort of the defense industry at the moment. One of the things that we're being told, and we have to address this very quickly, that some of the industry, at least the defense sector that provides our weapon systems and so on, is contracting already in anticipation of these next round of cuts, and that by perhaps as much as 1 million jobs will be lost in that sector alone. Your thoughts about how inadvisable that might be?
Well, apparently those weren't shovel-ready jobs, Frank. I mean, those were good-paying jobs for Americans who were defending our country and keeping the world safe for democracy, but those aren't important as making sure Obama's allies get paid off and his social programs and everything else can go unmolested. So I think it's another example of weakening our country to further the progressive socializing agenda of Obama and his team.
Well, that sounds cynical, Jim, but I must say it sounds so right based on what we see in the way of evidence, that there are good jobs and there are bad jobs, and the good jobs are the jobs we don't have and may not have. The bad jobs are the ones that are involved in trying to make sure that we stay safe and free. Jim Henson, thank you so much for finding a few minutes to visit with us. Keep up the good work, and we'll look forward to visiting with you again next week.